Hi, and welcome to Ruby's Ask Me Anything Office Hours. My name is Dan Merrick. I'm the director of plant based culinary, and we open up this hour to be able to have our audience ask any questions cooking related to be able to help out in your venture in the kitchen. It's really easy to do. All you have to do is type your question on the right hand side in that little box that says Add Question Here. Click the button that says Add, and then it will go off to our moderators to be able to make sure that it pertains to our conversation for the day, and then will be added to the queue on the right hand side. Now, if you notice that queue, you'll see little hearts that are next to them. You can actually click on those if you'd like the question to be brought up to the top to be able to be answered quickly. With the amount of questions we have today, I'm pretty sure we'll get through them all pretty easily, so we don't need to upvote. If you want something to be able to be upvoted, go ahead, but we'll just dig right in. All right, so we're actually going to start out with Leola. Um, is the forks over knives appropriate or course appropriate for someone who has difficulty cooking an over easy egg? I try, but I'm terrible at it. So that's actually not the class I would recommend for cooking eggs at all, because on the forks over knives course, you don't eat any dairy or any eggs like that at all. If you want to learn a little bit more about cooking eggs, you might want to look into the Jacques Pepin course at the moment, which is a wonderful course, goes over a huge amount of different traditional cooking as well, and has some really great, insightful videos on Jacques doing eggs as well. We do a lot of eggs in our pro courses and some of our other courses as well, but he definitely kind of shows you a wider variety of those. And for a home cook, it's actually really great because it's an affordable course at the same time too. And it's pretty much 100% video, which is a wonderful course to be able to do. So, that being said, an over easy egg is actually just the same kind of a thing as a sunny side up egg. So the easiest way to be able to do that is just put a pat of butter into a saute pan, and then put your egg into it until it starts to fry up. Now, that would be just a sunny side egg up if you cooked it just that way, where the outside starts to congeal a little bit. If you want the sunny, or if you want an over easy egg, it's typically called an over easy because you're actually flipping over the egg and resting it on the top to be able to cook it. Now, for an easy egg, it could be a little less than a minute on the other side when you flip it. If you want it over medium, about a minute and a half or something like that. I think that most professionals would do a different method instead of flipping it to be able to keep it looking really nice and pretty, and that would be to actually put about a tablespoon of water into the pan after the egg has started to cook up a little bit, and put a lid on it. Then it'll actually give you a nice coating on the top of the egg, where the top of that yolk gets the coating on it. And you can do that as long as you want to get the firmness of the yolk on that you want to. There are some other methods as well where you can take like a spoon and get some of the liquid or butter to be able to kind of spoon it over the top to be able to make it so that will kind of, harden up over the top as well. You could, of course, just take your spatula underneath it. Once the edge of it starts to crisp up again, gently flip it over, and let it sit for about a minute to be able to get the over easy. But that's something you can definitely check out in the Jacques Pepin course as well, too. So I hope that helps. Um, yeah. Okay. So yeah. So Patrick's asking. He's just adding into that is. In reference to this, is it something like where you're not worried about the egg specifically, but can I boil water, right? Or can I cook water is kind of that question. So that course is great for somebody who doesn't have a lot of cooking skills and is just starting out as well too. So the Forks Over Knives course is great to be able to take you on the adventure of cooking at home. and really helping you to slide into that. So I might have read that a little bit wrong. Thank you, Patrick, for bringing that up. So yeah, if you're terrible just at cooking in general, the Forks Over Knives class is a great way to be able to just get you started as a starting out cook as well too. Our professional course is definitely, a little further down. So if you took the Forks Over Knives class and you wanted to go into one of the other ones, that would work just as well too. But just to give you a heads up, the Forks Over Knives is based off of a whole food plant-based diet, which is a little bit more restricted, but a lot of people do eat that way, and it is a very healthy way to be able to eat. So if you are eating, if you're not eating eggs, that would work out just great for you as well. Thanks, Patrick, for the update on that. So, Joseph, hi, Chef. Thanks for doing a live event. My question is about coffee essence. What is the best recommended coffee to use for this? Dark versus medium, instant coffee versus instant espresso, and wet versus dry method to make caramel for coffee essence. Thanks. So I've worked at a couple places that we've done this for, and we've always used an instant coffee to be able to do this. So dry coffee, basically, uh, you know, putting water into it and then bringing it up to a boil. But at the same time, we would take like the sugar and water to start the caramel and bring that up to a temperature. It starts to bubble up quite a bit, and then you pour the hot coffee basically into your caramel to be able to make that essence. Now, if you're just making the essence, you can do the same thing with just the water, the instant coffee, and the sugar in the same pot, bringing it all up to the same thing where you don't have to make it into that caramel. But if you're making a caramel specifically, you definitely want to bring it up to the caramel temp and then add the hot coffee to it. Now, difference between dark versus medium, instant espresso versus instant coffee, that is all a personal preference to be able to get the unique flavor profile that you're looking at because different brands of those will all taste different. A medium blend versus a dark blend will definitely have a more bitter flavor on the dark end and a lighter flavor on the medium roast as well too. So those are things to consider when you're experimenting with this as well. So, and coffee essence can be used in all kinds of things. You don't have to just put it in the caramel. You can just take it as well and use it in all kinds of cakes and frostings. I've even seen people make marinades out of it as well to infuse the coffee flavor into different plant-based dishes. You could even do it with fruits. I've seen it done before where it was a coffee infused pear, I think was the time. The last time I saw a fruit do that as well. So a lot of different versions to be able to, or a lot of different things you can use it for. But most time I've seen it done with an instant coffee. Um, We've usually used a medium roast. You can definitely do an espresso if you're looking for a kind of a bolder flavor as well. And when you're doing it in caramel, that's great. That sugar kind of mix into it just adds a really wonderful kind of flavor to it. So I hope that helps. Ingrid, the problem I have with eggs, e.g., poached, is that the egg yolks cooks quickly while the egg white is slow. Is this normal? Any suggestions? So, the egg and the egg white, that's really interesting that your yolk is cooking quicker than your egg white because if you're thinking about it, like typically when you're poaching an egg, you're doing it in a liquid. I usually do it with just a touch of vinegar into it as well too. But when you spin the water to be able to kind of put it into, the water is touching the outside white first, so that should be cooking first, and it's getting the yolk last. So your yolk actually ends up being the last thing to cook. So I'm really interested to see how the yolk would cook quickly and the white is slow. And I think what maybe is happening here is that you're seeing kind of the white kind of mix with the water on the outside, and you see those kind of strings on the outside. Those are actually cooked. They're just kind of straying out into the water a little bit. Um, Now, if it's really easy to go too long on a poached egg as well too. So you can overcook it pretty quickly if you leave it in too long. And then even when you bring it out at the end there, it'll seem like your whites are kind of velvety, but your yolk might be hard, and that's because you've left it in too long. Now, if you took it out even a minute or two earlier, you would see that your yolk would still be yellow on the inside, and you'd still have that kind of velvety white on the outside. So yeah, it's not quite a normal thing to have your yolk cook before the white on a poached egg, just because physically it's surrounded by the heat and the white should cook first. But yeah, that's my suggestion for making a poached egg is basically to water mixture with vinegar into it. I usually do a stir on it, then drop the egg in, and I usually give it about a minute and a half to be able to kind of start with that. Might be off on the timing. It's been a bit since I've done a poached egg, but then pull it out with a slotted spoon basically and rest it while you do the other ones. You can also do them in larger batches in hotel pans as well too. Just keep a quick eye on them and quick hand with that spoon. Maria, is there an ingredient you can add to a whole food plant-based mac and cheese to give it a more cheesy flavor? Yes, nutritional yeast is actually probably the go-to to be able to get the cheesy flavor for whole food plant-based mac and cheese. Nutritional yeast is has that kind of umami flavor to it. That and a little bit of salt, I think, will help out quite a bit on the mac and cheese flavor that you're looking for there. Camille, do you know of any way to introduce the Forks Over Nile style of eating and cooking on a volunteer basis to communities, especially those at high risk of diabetes, health, and heart disease, etc.? So this can be kind of a slippery slope, especially if you're volunteering, right? So you want to make sure that you're doing what you are volunteering to do properly, right? So to start out, just to be like, okay, like I'm doing the job that I was hired or volunteering to be able to do. But if you want, if part of that is preparing food for, those communities, the best way that I would recommend, and I have done in the past, is to be able to make the food that I make for whole food plant based in place of some of the traditional foods that they might have at those things. So, just making sure that you're kind of switching up ingredients, keeping it as whole food plant based as you can, and making them not realize that they're eating a whole food plant based or forks over knives style eating. So you're able to make other things like the mac and cheese is a great example of that, right? So if you made a whole food plant-based mac and cheese instead of traditional Kraft mac and cheese, and you made it good enough that they're really not even going to notice that it doesn't have dairy in it. That's really the key to be able to help win over the community. And then you can always tell them afterward to say like, hey, this is the difference on this. Of course, you do want to have ingredient labels out, because if people do think it is one thing and it's another, they might have allergens that are antiquated with that. So if there are allergies, you definitely want to, make sure that you're watching out for those. But my big thing, and I've done it for years, is just taking traditional dishes and turning them into whole food plant-based dishes, and that wins over a lot of people. And I did that in Texas very often, where I had Texas ranchers and their wives coming up to me asking me for things like my potato salad recipe, and it was didn't have any mayo in it at all. I used cashew cream in it instead, and doing things like my chili that were whole food plant based. I won a couple different Texas chili cook-offs with a whole food plant-based chili, and nobody knew it was whole food. It was plant-based even. And I was up against people that were cooking brisket and putting that in their chilies, So the best way to do that is just win them over with their taste buds, right? All right, Deborah, a Ruby recipe, the balsamic reduction, called for lucamo, which I'm pronouncing wrong. I haven't heard or used this before. Can you explain its use and the best place to get it? Thank you. So I can't tell you the best place to get it. I know that if you do a search on it, you can find different stores online to be able to find it. I do know what it is. It's basically a plant, and I have a little excerpt on it here as well too. And on that recipe, you'll see that Chef Shar actually did a wonderful explanation about that as well. So if you've seen a little bit of research into it, you can find out that it's basically a great sugar replacer that has a lot of vitamins in it, but it also thicken up things as well. And I do have to tell you, honestly, out of all the thousands of times I've done a balsamic reduction, I have never used that ingredient ever. I typically just use the balsamic to be able to reduce as well. So it's definitely not needed to be able to make a balsamic reduction. But if you want to use it, it'll thicken it up just a little bit as well too. That's totally fine. But if it's a question of like, ooh, do I really need this? You definitely do not. I've never used it in the past myself at all, and I can't tell you anybody that I know that has either. So hope that helps. Mary Beth, I have the carbon steel wok. I normally only clean it with kosher salt. Now that I'm cooking with no oil, I'm experiencing it drying out. I have been reheating it. Um, and rub with oil. Any other suggestions? Yeah, that's exactly what I would do. For no oil cooking, for especially for a carbon steel wok or something like that, it still needs to have the season on it. And it's kind of the same thing with cast iron as well too, because if you're cooking in it a lot, you're going to lose some of the seasoning that comes on with that. And the seasoning is typically an oil. Like you can do other things, as a seasoning on it. Traditionally, it would be a lot of animal fats. I've even seen people use like Crisco or stuff like that as well too. But a good high heat oil is probably the best way to be able to help keep your pan seasoned. Now, I'm not saying to cook with oil. What I'm saying is to put the oil into the pan and then rub it out very well with a paper towel or a cloth to be able to get all the excess off, but you're still keeping your nonstick surface on the inside. Now, after I do that, I typically put it into the oven as well to be able to cook off any of the extra residue that's with that as well too. But again, you're not cooking with the oil; you're actually just using it to season the pan. So the same thing would work with your carbon steel wok as well. But good question. Sure, we were just talking about you. All right, hi Dan. If you're putting a quick chili together, what are your go-to beans and seasonings? So that's funny that you asked that because I just talked about cooking chili in Texas, and it's just about that time to start up chili season again too. So my go-to things are kind of what I have on hand a little bit, but usually my go-to beans are going to be a pinto, and I usually do a pinto and black bean mixture. My seasonings are always going to be a chili powder, paprika, and cumin mixture. Now, the trick is to be able to add the seasonings a little bit at the beginning, a little bit at the middle, and a little bit at the end as well too. And I start with just a basic mirepoix of carrots, onion, sometimes celery, depending, if I have it, and then be able to kind of cook those off and then kind of add everything into it. The tomatoes, your beans, but each time I'm putting something in, I'm adding a little bit of the seasoning too. So as I cook my mirepoix, I'm putting in a little bit of chili powder and a little bit of cumin. And then as I put my tomatoes in, I put in a little different and kind of layering it up as you will. Depending on who it's for, I'll put in jalapenos. I'll finish it off with cilantro. So kind of a simple kind of mix up to those as well too. I do have a trick for you though as well. If you cook it the day before, it's so much better the day after because all the flavors have had time to kind of meld into each other. So, little secret tip for you there that's helped me win a couple of chili cook-offs. Cook it the day before and let it set. Great to see you on here, Shar, and thanks for your tip on the earlier one too, that we linked in here. Holly, what are your favorite kinds of knives to use? I know our course talks up chef knives, but I've read others prefer other types. Other than chef knives. Yeah, so I typically do use chef knives for the majority of the work I do, but I will, I'll use paring knives for doing smaller hand work for things like, I don't know, peeling off the outside of an apple or just, cutting up an apple or something like that. But a chef knife is typically what I'm going to is going to be my go-to. Now I have different lengths, for them. My traditional, I guess, is an 8-inch chef knife that I keep three just in my knife block all the time. One is a vegetable knife that has kind of holes in it to be able to help when you're slicing things so nothing sticks to it. The other two are just classics. And the I do have a smaller one I actually have two smaller ones that are 6-inch blades as well too. So those are kind of my go-to in the kitchen. And other things like utility knives, like maybe like a bread knife, that's a serrated edge. I do have another smaller serrated blade for things like tomatoes, but quite often I'm just going to use my chef knife anyways, just because I keep it nice and sharp and will go right through a tomato anyways. I might use a paring knife on a tomato. But yeah, so chef knives are kind of the ones that are the standard. It's the easiest to be able to, hold. Now there are other types of knives for different utilities that you're doing for like boning fish and, like butchering and stuff like that. But on a whole food plant-based diet, I'm not seeing much of that. So my go-to is I always have a couple good chef knives, 8 inch. I have a couple that are 6 inch, a serrated blade for a bread knife, a small serrated blade for other utility work, and then I usually keep at least three paring knives, kind of depending. And those are all just to be able to keep them clean and stuff like that. If there's multiple people in the kitchen, so I just have a couple of each to be able to go to be able to have. Now, you could absolutely just get away with three knives: a chef knife, your serrated bread knife, and a paring knife. And those are the only three knives you would really need to be able to get through any kitchen at all. So, those are probably what I would suggest for you. All right. So, Jason, no oil sauteing. If vegetables stick to the pan, add 1 to 2 tablespoons of water to prevent sticking. Should this water be hot water so it doesn't significantly decrease the pan temperature? And does that matter? That's a great question. And out of wow, almost 20 years of cooking with no oil, I this is the first time somebody's asked that of me. I traditionally just do it room temperature water, but you are correct in that the water will decrease the temperature of the pan while it is deglazing the pan. So it might be better to be able to use a hot water instead, but you'd have to be able to do it kind of quickly as like a boiling water to be able to put into it. I've always used room temperature water or other, liquids to be able to deglaze, and it seems to work just fine. So, you should be fine with just the room temperature. But if you want to make it hot, it probably would keep it so your temperature stays up at the same time. But that's a great question, Jason. Thanks for putting that one in there. Alice, hello, chef. On a whole food plant-based diet, can I use refined coconut oil in baking? So on a whole food plant-based diet, that's it's a little outside the spectrum of what you would typically use. Now, of course, it's your diet, so can you use it? That's up to you. It's a personal choice. Now, there's refined and unrefined coconut oil. Now, refined is basically well, let's start with unrefined. Unrefined is like basically scooping out the inside of the coconut, squeezing out everything out of it, and having that as your oil. And like, does have a lot of oil in it, but it does actually have a little bit of fiber to it as well too. The refined goes through a much bigger process where there are things that are added to it to be able to make it into more of an oil. Uh, then at that process, when you're getting to refined coconut oil, you're kind of in the same lane of just using any other oil. It's still 120 calories per tablespoon, and is processed at that point. So, refined coconut oil is not something you would use in a whole food plant-based diet. There are a lot of people on whole food plant-based diet that would say that unrefined coconut oil is also a no-no, but that's a personal preference, if I have to say, because it doesn't go through a whole lot of processing to be able to make the unrefined as well. All right. Micah, hi, Chef Dan. Good afternoon. I was just wondering if vegans get enough protein. That is a very common question that a lot of vegans get. And I have to wholeheartedly say yes. Vegans do get a lot of protein. A lot of people don't realize how much protein you're getting out of all kinds of different foods. Not even just specially, like what you think of as protein, but you find protein in a lot of different things. And vegetables have protein in them as well. So vegans do get a lot of protein just from eating what they normally would. Now, if it is for something like kids, I definitely increase protein, for my kids in particular. So we'll do different things like, we'll have tofu and tempeh and other kinds of things like that to be able to make sure they're getting a lot of protein and they're used to it. I make it in a lot of different ways so they never get tired of having it, as an ingredient. And But you can find it in all kinds of other things too, like grains, and even baked goods. Looking for a lot of protein and different things. So yeah, vegans do get enough protein. If it's a like somebody who's like a bodybuilder working out, doing big exercise kind of things, something you might need to pay a little bit more attention to. But on average, most people that are on a whole food plant-based diet are getting plenty of protein. But it is funny. I'm sorry to laugh, but it is one of those top questions that people do ask of vegans and vegetarians quite often. Um, and I actually have a couple things like if you kind of think of it like gorillas or rhinoceros, right? Or also plant-based, so like just kind of putting that out there. But Ingrid, how do you clean the oven efficiently, or how do you avoid it getting dirty? I was looking at my oven, the self-cleaning function, but turns out it's super high heat for 8 hours. Yeah, that is true. Um, I have to admit, I've never used a self-cleaning oven or function on any oven I've ever used. Um, Quite honestly, because it's just super duper high heat for 8 hours and it locks the doors and everything, and that just kinda scares me a little bit. So, anytime I've ever done it, what I've done is put, like a hotel pan or just a pan of water in the oven, turn it on for a little bit, let that kinda steam bath kinda moisten everything in the oven, take that out, and then get on my hands and knees and scrub it from the inside with a scrub brush, a sponge that has kind of a rigid edge on the outside of it as well too. And that's typically how I clean it. It's kind of old school, but it works well. And how to avoid getting it dirty is basically avoiding spills, which nobody can do. Things are going to happen, and that's just part of cooking, and that's okay. Another one from Ingrid. I was making paella. Some people put an aluminum foil on it, simulating a lid, but other leave it open with anything on it. How do you know when you put a lid on or not? So, for paella in particular, I do know some people will put aluminum foil or a lid on the top of it to be able to help cook the rice that's in the paella, to let it steam over. So if you have a lot of liquid in it, you don't have to really worry about it too much if your rice grains are actually underneath that liquid. But if not, you need the lid to be able to help kind of steam all the stuff that's in the inside. So I typically will do a paella. I do a vegetarian or vegan one, and I'll just make sure that I have a good amount of liquid in it to be able to soak up into the rice. That's typically just your typical, a little bit more liquid than you would put in rice because you're also cooking all the other ingredients with it as well too. But yeah, so a lid basically what they're doing is helping to steam everything, and keep that heat and liquid in the pot instead of letting it just kind of go up, and evaporate out, which is understandable. So, yeah, I just put a little extra liquid into it to be able to allow for that process, and it should work just fine. And it says you were making it, so I hope that turned out well. All right, here's another one from Ingrid. How do you decide to use an iron pan or a steel or a non-stick? That's kinda, a little bit of preference. Like, I personally just use different pans for different things, right? So, I use nonstick quite a lot now, now that I've switched over to a non-stick, the hex clad pans with the ceramic lining instead of the other lining, and they work really well. Whereas in the past, most of my non-sticks I was replacing every 6 months because as soon as I saw a scrape in the bottom, it was a done pan. I use steel every so often, depending on what I'm cooking, but non-stick just makes it so easy to clean. For home use, I'm primarily using that. I do use cast iron quite a bit as well too, but I'm usually doing those for like mushrooms, and doing things that I need to get a sear or something on that to it. I'll use it a lot when I'm camping as well too. So, But nonstick's kind of my go-to. I know that most of our stuff says to use steel, which is great. I have many steel pans. I just don't use them as often as the really good quality nonstick. Now, if you don't have a good quality nonstick, because they can be pretty expensive, using a steel pan is definitely a great alternative, and that is definitely the way to go for those as well too. Joe, when cooking fresh beets, how do you keep them from bleeding out? So I will typically cook my beets separately than everything else to start. So what I'll do is I'll take basically aluminum foil and wrap the beet up into that, and then put them in the oven at 350 to be able to roast for about an hour. And then when I bring them out, the skin is really easy to come off. I'll usually put a pair of gloves on, and either take a towel or a paper towel and peel off the outside of the beet, and then chop it up into the form I want. If I'm going to do it, discs or in cubes, I'll do it from there. And then at that point, I'll add it to whatever else I'm going to cook it with. I might season it at that point, like if I'm doing like a poke bowl or something like that. When I'm doing a vegan version, I often use beets for that as well too. So I usually basically will kind of cook it separate from everything else to be able to make sure that it doesn't bleed out into everything. But as soon as you add it to any dish, it is going to start bleeding out. So just don't stir it up a lot into it as well too. Um, Ingrid, how do you know when to cover a food item with aluminum foil or not in a grill or an oven, meat, vegetables, baking, etc.? So typically that when you're covering something, what you're doing is you're making sure that you're keeping all the moisture on the inside of something, and you're not getting a crust on the top of it. So think of it like a lasagna, right? So when you're making a lasagna, you would typically cover the lasagna when you put it into the oven and let it cook for an hour or so to make sure all the ingredients are melting into each other. All the liquids are kind of bubbling up inside of that, but it's actually keeping all the liquid in. And then for the last 15 minutes, you would take your aluminum foil off the lasagna, put it back into it, and it would crisp up on the top. So because there's no, top basically keeping all the moisture in, it helps to be able to crisp that top up. Hope that helps. Ingrid, I made like lentil patties, and the problem is that if I used high heat, they kind of burned, but if I leave it on medium low heat, they kind of crumble. Huh. I guess it's because the water evaporated. Tips, yeah. So it might be your binder, to tell you the truth. So I would find a good binder for those. I don't know what you use, but lentils typically, what I'll do is just kind of puree some of the lentil a bit, not all of them, but just some of them to be able to help bind those up together. Aquafaba is another great binder as well too. But yeah, like if you do high heat right away, you're definitely going to burn it. So the medium is probably where I would kind of go in between there. So you're still getting it heated through, you're getting a nice edge on it as well. And then using that binder to be able to kind of keep everything, like for the lentils, I would just do a little puree and, maybe like a quarter of the lentils, and then kind of use that as my binder to be able to come back together as well too. You'll find that it keeps the moisture in there a lot more too. Heidi, I'm also curious about the course saying the chef's knife is the most useful knife. I have one, but prefer my 4-inch paring for all but large items like cantaloupe. That's a personal preference, Heidi. If you like your paring knife better than a chef knife, go for it. When I started working with Jacques Pepin doing our course, the Jacques Pepin uh, what was it, the taste or the Jacques Pepin course that we have on Ruby, I was quite surprised to see that he used a paring knife for most of the stuff he was doing, and that's great. That's fun. It's a different generation, learn different ways. So chef knife is not always used. If you're more comfortable with a 4-inch paring knife instead of a large knife, that's totally fine. Um, just it's going to be easier on your hand with a bigger knife than it would for a smaller one. But if you're used to that, stick with it. That's totally fine. Ingrid, once again here. What's the difference between tamari and soy sauce? Can they be used interchangeably? Yeah, they actually can be used interchangeably. The difference is that soy sauce typically has some sort of gluten in it, and tamari is a gluten-free product. They're made a little bit differently, but soy sauce typically has the gluten added to it just to be able to get the color and believe the consistency in it as well too. But I do know that tamari is a gluten-free product. Soy sauce is not. But can they be used interchangeably? Yes, they totally can be used one for the other, and I do it quite often. And another one from Ingrid. When I'm cooking, I go forward and back from the sink as I'm touching different foods. How do you chefs do to avoid this? When I'm going back and forth from the sink as I'm touching different foods, what do you do to avoid this? So yeah, it looks like you're just rinsing your hands between different ingredients. Now that's okay to do, but typically most chefs will just wash their hands before they get everything going. You'll get all your ingredients basically kind of washed in the state that you want to, and then once you start using those ingredients, they're not washing their hands between each one. Now the one difference in this is meat products. If you're using meat products, you do want to go back and wash your hands and your cutting surfaces actually as well after you're done doing them. But for vegetables, if you're making something like the chili we were talking about earlier, you can go through and peel the carrots and cut the celery and cut up the tomatoes and all those other things with washing your hands just the one time and then not having to worry about it. Now, if you're adding something like a chicken or beef to that, do your vegetables first, then cut up your meat on a cutting board, and then thoroughly wash your hands cutting boards afterward. And that's just something you have to do as part of cooking if you're cooking with meats. Being plant based, we don't have to worry about that cross contamination as much unless somebody has an allergen to one of the vegetables that it's in there or gluten as well. So, when you are cooking, you are going to be washing your hands quite a bit just to be able to keep things nice and clean, especially if you're doing it with meats. All right. So, that actually brings us to the end of our Ask Me Anything office hours. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.